Hey everybody and welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to be talking about Alan Moore. Hey everybody and welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host Brent and I want to talk a little bit about Alan Moore today. Now, who is Alan Moore? If you're not familiar with him, he's the guy that wrote V for Vendetta. Yes, this is a comic book. Did you know? The artwork inside is done by David Lloyd. Very different from the movie, so kind of just, they're way, way separate. And then he also wrote what is probably most famous for is Watchmen. And this is the superhero deconstruction he wrote in 1986. And it is the one of Time's 100 best novels. This one right here. Novels, like all books, not just graphic novels. It was made into a movie. It's been adapted as like a pseudo-sequel TV show on HBO. That was freaking great. And there's also motion comics on iTunes you can catch, or they might be on YouTube as well, that are actually like every single page of this story, and they move them. And there's one guy that does all the voices, even the women voices. A little jarring. It came out when I was in college. But, you can also experience it that way. But there's kind of nothing like reading it, because Watchmen has all this back material, essays and histories about the character and fake book excerpts or newspaper stories that all take place in the world of Watchmen. So it kind of fills in all the gaps and history of the characters that you're talking about here. But I want to talk about Alan Moore today because he's kind of not an enemy of comic books, but he's somebody who made his name in comic books. He, started out doing Swamp Thing and did he do Judge Dredd? I'm not sure. But he's a British comic book writer. He got famous for doing Watchmen and V for Vendetta. They did movies of his work. He's written some phenomenal stories as well for superheroes. He did Batman, not Long Halloween, The Killing Joke, where Joker shoots Barbara Gordon, and drawn by Brian Boland. He also did Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow for Superman right before Crisis on Infinite Earths back in the 80s. So he's a very, very talented writer, no doubt. These are the two books of his that I own. I have read the other stories in like digital or whatever. He also wrote From Hell, which was also adapted into a movie that's pretty terrible. I have not read that book. It's like a massive tome. And he also wrote League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was also adapted into a terrible movie. So the idea of, Alan Moore embracing comic adaptations of his comic work was gone by 2005, I think, when they made that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie. He hated that movie so much, he insisted that his name be taken off the work, which is why sometimes when you watch things related to Watchmen, it'll say by the original writer and Dave Gibbons, or it'll say just illustrated by Dave Gibbons, and won't tell you who wrote it, which I think is it's pretty fucking sad, honestly. Because whether or not you want your name taken off the project, all these things are still inspired by things you wrote, and at least you deserve the credit of saying, hey, this was inspired by this. You should go check it out. Instead of being like, I wrote this story, and if it was a terrible movie, that's something different. But the Watchmen movie, which honestly isn't that bad. I kind of like it. It is pretty slavish to the source material, but it changes the ending in a way that I think works for the film. But his name's not even on there. So to say that it was inspired by his creativity, by his work. So he's obviously a very prolific writer and a very creative man. But I think the problem with Alan Moore is that he's got too big a head for himself. And now he's too grumpy and too burnt by Hollywood that he no longer wants to even, to be associated with any of his comic work, because so much of it has been, adapted or inspired to do other things. I mean, I think his biggest rub is Watchmen. The original deal for Watchmen apparently was Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore, the creators here, were going to keep DC was going to keep the rights to Watchmen as long as it was being published. And once they stopped publishing it, they did 12 issues, a trade paperback, and then a couple years later, the rights would revert back to the two original creators. This was before Vertigo and all that other stuff. So that was the deal for them. However, this thing is so brilliant and such a hit, and DC sells thousands of these Watchmen graphic novels every single year, and now it's spawned movies and television adaptations, that this thing will never go out of print. So it's kind of DC's way of screwing DC corporate, I don't know who's behind it or whatever, of screwing Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. And, Dave Gibbons for a while, I think, was, kind of okay with it, and was, willing to take some of the movie profits and stuff that Alan Moore had, said, okay, Dave, you take it. So I think he was willing to take that money. But even Dave Gibbons, I feel like, a little bit is kind of distancing himself from the Watchmen associations now, especially now the Doomsday Clock is out, and they've kind of wrangled that into the DC universe, of which this was never supposed to be. But this is a different story. I really want to talk about Alan Moore because he did this interview with Deadline. And it's a rare interview, even though I see a rare interview with Alan Moore like pop up every 2 years, in which he comes out and trashes the comic book industry and trashes comic books in themselves. And I'm getting a little sick and tired of it. For, maybe it's this. Maybe comic books need to find a new savior, a new Jesus Christ to worship, because for so long, as I've been reading comic books, when I started reading in the late 90s and early 2000s, before Alan Moore had lost his love for comic books, he was our savior and our saint. It was like Saint Alan Moore. The man could do no wrong. Everything he wrote was freaking genius, and he was like the most worshipped comic book author there was. And I think he's still held to some regard in that way, and I think it's time to stop, because this man is no longer a fan of the medium, a fan of the artwork, a fan of the things he wrote, pretty much. Like, it's just disappointing, and at this point disgusting, in which if he doesn't want to talk about comic books, if he's retired from comics in 2015 or whatever, 2016, then be retired from comics and don't talk about us anymore. It's like an ex-girlfriend that won't stop talking trash about you, even though you haven't dated her in like 10 years or something like that. Or, oh, he was an asshole. Well, I've changed. You've changed, you have no idea who I am anymore, so why do you keep talking about me? That's how I think of Alan Moore in this situation. So in this interview with Deadline, like every interview, if you've seen of Alan Moore, you can just Google them. He trashes comic books. He trashes the entire medium. And I don't, disagree with him, but I think it's like really disrespectful, because he made his name off comic books. Like, it's similar in the way that Mark Wahlberg will not talk about Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch anymore, and he doesn't want to be referred to that, or even, barely bring that up, but it's a little like, well, dude, that's how we met you. That's how we knew you, from this song and this dance. And you were a rapper in the early 90s, and then you transitioned to an actor and a producer, and now you're very prolific and very successful. So why don't you recognize that that's how you got your start? Now, Alan Moore is a little bit different, because he's trying to break into novels and TV shows or whatever he's doing now. I think it's a TV show called The Show. But this is how you got your start. This is how the world knows you. The world knows who Alan Moore is because of Watchmen, because of V for Vendetta, because of The Killing Joke, and all of the cultural meaning, and everyone who's read it over the last almost 40 years, 35 years or whatever, have read these. So there's many, many people out there working in the culture today that are inspired by your work and love your work, and for you to just write them off as childish or whatever is really insulting. So fuck you, Alan Moore. Like, give me a break. Let's go through this. So they're talking about the pandemic. This is the Deadline interview from, I want to say it's the 9th. Yeah, October 9th, 2020. So, and I don't know what the stipulations were. If he said, I'd rather not talk about comic books, in his deep English accent, his kind of pompous attitude here. But the author asks him about it anyway, because that's what's going to get the juicy headline, right? And it worked. It got the comic book fans mad, right? He retired in comics in 2018 with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think The Black Dossier was maybe his last work. So he goes on to say, he's been doing comics for 40 years, and when he retired, and the big attraction to, quote, The big attraction was that this was a medium that was vulgar. It had been created to entertain working class people, particularly children. The way that the industry has changed, it's graphic novels now. It's entirely priced for an audience of middle class people. I have nothing against middle class people, but it wasn't meant to be a medium for middle-aged hobbyists. It was meant to be a medium for people who haven't got much money. End quote. Like, what the fuck is that? Vulgar? The comics, when you entered in 1982, 83, 84, yes, were being read by children. But Alan Moore, if there's anyone to blame for comics growing up and being for middle-aged hobbyists like me right now, it's Alan Moore. He's the guy that's to blame for the entire state of the industry right now. The entire way it moved away from kids in spinner racks and into comic shops and kept aging up with the readership is because he wrote Watchmen. It's because he wrote V for Vendetta. And when these had come out, no one had seen anything like them before. You have adult characters in here talking about adult things, talking about rape experiences and the trauma of that, talking about growing up in a foster home without a family and dealing with abuse, talking about sex, talking about violence, talking about politics and the way the world works. That is not something meant for children. I would not let my children near this book until they were at least 15. V for Vendetta is like a diatribe against Margaret Thatcher in the 80s and how he thought the government was going to become kind of what we have now with all of the security cameras and spying and data mongering. It's all here in the early mid 80s, 85, 87, 86, whenever the hell this came out. Started in Warrior Magazine, but it's all here. This is adult. There's rape in here, there's sex in here, there are bad words, there's language. It's an entirely adult book. It's aimed at adults. It's written for adults. For someone to be snaring at comics as vulgar, he is the one that made comics for adults. And to say that it was for working class people and not middle class people. Well, right now, dude, there's not that much difference other than a college degree and a couple tens of $1,000s in income between working class people and middle class people, honestly. Middle class people now may make anywhere between 50 to 100 grand, and working class people is underneath that 50. We don't live that much different maybe than it's either an apartment or a house, depending on what the city you live in, or a trailer. I don't know your situation. I'm pretty good, but I don't consider myself upper middle class or whatever. We're scraping by. We're doing what we can. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but I'm blessed to have the career and the house and the family I have, but I worked hard for it too. So it's just really upsetting to see somebody who we still worship as being the greatest creator of them all. Comics is Jesus Christ and Saint, Alan Moore, to sneer at us this way and say that, oh, these middle-aged hobbyists are, ruining the industry. It may be true. And yes, comics has been, aging with its readership as it's gone along. But there are also readers that are still getting into comics, even if they're later in life when they're getting into it. There are many people that are probably getting into comics when they're older instead of when they're 7 or 8, because they're no longer in the 7-Elevens. They're no longer on spinner racks in grocery stores. But when you're a teenager and you're seeing all the superhero movies and stuff like that, you might actually want to walk into the Barnes & Noble comic book graphic novel section or the local comic book shop. You might wander in there because you're older and you're more mature enough to be interested in that sort of thing. When you're little, you have the movies and cartoons and video games and toys, but when you're a little older, you might want something more sophisticated. And what are they going to give you when you walk into that comic shop for the first time and say, hey, I like the movies, but I'm looking for something a little more adult. I don't want the smash bang superhero fare. What are the guys in the comic shop going to give you? They're going to give you these two. They're going to go, try Watchmen. This shows you that comics are not just for kids, but they're really adult now. They're going to give you V for Vendetta after that, if you really liked Watchmen. This guy is selling book after book after book after book on the backs of new readers that are older now. And he's sneering at them of his readership. They're still your readers, man. It's just absurd. understand that industries change. You know, the telephone industry is not the same as it was back in the 70s and 80s when you had, you know, Sprint doing ads for long distance with a pin drop. And now they're a fucking mobile company. You don't even have Sprint for long distance anymore. The industry has evolved. It has changed. This is what the comic book industry is now. Like it or not, that's what it is. But you, Alan Moore, had the effect of changing the industry. It's mostly your fault. You know, if you look at the stuff in the 80s that came out that changed the comic book industry, that made it go dark, it was Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Dark Knight Returns, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like, you know, that's what people point to as the things for change in the 80s that settled us in this grim, dark era of the late 80s, early 90s. You know, it's Alan Moore had everything to do with it because of Watchmen, because of what happened to the Man of Tomorrow, because of The Killing Joke. So it's a big joke to sneer down at us and call us, you know, not worthy of being able to read comics because we're middle class and it's meant for lower class working people. It's just absurd. Like, shut the fuck up. Seriously. This guy, he makes me so mad. I don't know why. And maybe it's because I'm making a video. I'm getting a little bit more worked up at it than I really was when I read it. But I did read it last night and I was really like, seriously, dude? Seriously? All right. So Deadline, the next question is, you said you feel responsible for how comics have changed. Why? And Moore actually owns up to the things I just said. I should have reread this before I started this rant. It's largely my work that attracted an adult audience. It was the way that was commercialized by the comics industry. There were tons of headlines saying that comics had grown up. But other than a couple particular individual comics, they really hadn't. This thing happened with graphic novels in the 1980s. People wanted to carry on reading comics as they always had. Now they could do it in public and feel sophisticated because they weren't reading a children's comic. It wasn't seen as subnormal. You didn't get the huge advances in adult comic books that I was thinking we might have, as witnessed by the end of superhero films, ... So I'm glad you're owning up to it, dude, because I just did 10 minutes on how this is all your fault. Here's the other thing that was kind of weird. It's like, what's your take on the comics industry now? I doubt the major comic companies will be coming out of lockdown in any shape at all. Dude, I've been to a comic shop. I do live in Florida, so we have no restrictions anymore during the pandemic. It's still weird. We're still staying safe and doing our part. Me and my family, anyway. But I went into the comic store, and they're selling stuff. They're getting their weekly books. They're operating as business as normal. And I'm sure other stores around the country and around the world are still struggling, you know, but comics are coming out, so there is an opportunity for them to make money as opposed to in March or April when Diamond shut down and stuff like that. So I think it's a little absurd to think that they're not going to come out of this pandemic. And, you know, so he also talks about comics artists not growing. If you look at the growth chart of comics, you can find it on like ICV2 and you can Google it on comic book resources. It shows that like comic books have grown over the last 3 to 4 years. Each year it gets a little bigger and a little bigger. It's not skyrocketing, it's not exponential, but it is chartable. And the reason for this is things like this. Graphic novels sell more and they're a bigger market than the single issues. The single issues right now are a lost leader. They're mostly selling graphic novels in bookstores, on Amazon, in comic shops. You go in, you want a good story, you want a complete story, you buy these, you know? So to say that it's not growing or it's going to be a dead thing in a little while, like, you don't even know. I mean, it says you retired in 2018, but are you really involved with comics if you're just buried your head in the sand and focusing on your own work instead of paying attention to the industry at large? This is the Jesus Christ of our industry wants nothing to do with us and hasn't paid attention to the comic industry for the last 15, 20 years, but at the same time can tell us we're all doom and gloom and we're not going to survive for any while. Like, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk about it at all. And, you know, if you don't want anything to do with us, then don't talk about us. This is exactly like what I said before. This is the ex-girlfriend that you broke up with years ago that won't stop talking shit about you. That's what Alan Moore is right here. And, you know, oh, do you watch any superhero films? Oh, no. I have not seen a superhero film since the 1989 Tim Burton Batman, is like what he's saying. So, you know, that was like the second movie to come out. So don't be like, oh, well, I watched them and they were terrible and anything like that. You haven't watched a single one of the modern superhero films. Now, he might say, yes, they're kiddie, but like every PG-13 action film now is made for that age group, that 7 to adult age group, you know? So it's like, this is how Hollywood works. If you don't like it, don't ingest it, I guess. And if he's not ingesting it, fine. Okay, here's the next thing. Do you watch any superhero movies at all? What about something a bit offbeat, like Joker? It won an Oscar anyway for the acting. You wrote a key Batman comic book, ... Oh, Christ, no, I don't watch any of them. All of these characters have been stolen from their original creators. They have a long line of ghosts standing behind them. In the case of Marvel films, Jack Kirby, I have no interest in superheroes. They were a thing that was invented in the late 1930s for children. And they are perfectly good as children's entertainment. But if you try to make them for the adult world, I think it becomes kind of grotesque. I've been told the Joker film wouldn't exist without my Joker story. 1988's Batman the Killing Joke, but 3 months after I'd written that, I was disowning it. It was far too violent. It was Batman, for Christ's sake. It was a guy dressed as a bat. Increasingly, I think the best version of Batman was Adam West. Are you serious? Are you kidding me? So, yeah, this is how far out there Alan Moore is today. This is a guy that, you know, thinks superheroes are only for children and they were invented in the 1930s and never grew since. This guy was reading superhero comic books when he was a kid. Otherwise, you have to have been, because that's like all they were publishing when this guy was a child. He rose to prominence in the 80s, so let's give it 20 years before. So you're probably reading him in the 60s, in the 50s, early 70s, whatever, before you really started getting interested in writing comic books as a writer, which is how you broke into the writing industry, dude. But they're for children. So, yeah, you wrote some comic book stories, and you wrote some stories, but you wrote the last Superman story, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which, you know, doesn't have any sex and violence or anything, but it's kind of an adult story because it's about an adult man looking back. So everything he wrote, he didn't write for kids. He wrote for adults because he wrote it through an adult lens. The Killing Joke is a violent Batman story, but after The Killing Joke, every Batman story is pretty much this violent. You can't go reading Batman War Games, Batman No Man's Land, Batman Bruce Wayne Murderer, and Bruce Wayne Fugitive. You can't go reading Batman Nightfall, Night's End. You can't go reading Troika. You can't go reading Batman Earth 1. You can't go reading Batman City of Crime, Batman Blackest Night, Batman Longest Night, or whatever the hell Scott Snyder's writing, or Tom King's run now. You can't go reading that Batman line now without it being as violent or in the same tone that The Killing Joke set for Batman. So in another way, he's responsible for Batman being the way he is now because of The Killing Joke. Because it was so brilliant and successful. And it's a great story. Go read it. But for God's sake, dude, stop talking shit about your own work. You know, the best Batman is Adam West, who didn't take it at all seriously. Well, yeah, he didn't take it at all seriously because they were making a comedy show, and he knew it. And that's not to say that, like, you know, Alan Moore thinks anybody playing Batman shouldn't take it seriously. An actor's going to act. They're going to do what's based off the script that they work with. This guy has no clue. I think we're going to stop here because we've just proved our point. Alan Moore hates comic books. He doesn't want us to read his work anymore. He doesn't want to talk about it. He sneers at it. He disowns it, you know. So why did we waste our last 20 minutes of our lives giving him the air to breathe in the room? I don't know. But I just want to put it out there. Fuck you, Alan Moore, and thank you for your work. I'm Brent Casina. This has been BK's Bullets. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, like it down below. Let me know what you thought and what you think of Alan Moore right now, looking down on you and sneering you because you like comic books and you're a middle-aged man or woman. But thank you. Bye-bye.